in just a second. Right, hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello, it's Books at Lunchtime. And we are very excited. I've got Rachel with me today, and we are very excited to have been joined by Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi, who is the author of several books, including The First Woman. And we've had this in the diary for a really long time, so it's so exciting to get to see you. Hello, Jennifer.
Hello, Tracy. Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. The pleasure's all ours. And Rachel, friend of the shop for a long while, but there's a particular reason we picked on you today, isn't there? Jennifer, do you want to tell us about your book?
Sure. The First Woman is set in Uganda between 1975 to around 1982. Mostly during Amin's regime. And it's about a little girl called Jago growing up in what we call the Bugerere district in Mukono. And she's growing up with her grandparents. And her problem is that she doesn't know who her mother is. And sometimes when she is a little bit unhappy, she flies out of her body. And she thinks that she flies out of her body because she's a witch. But as she gets to think about it, she probably suspects that probably she doesn't know who her mother is because her mother abandoned her, because probably she found out she was a witch and left her. So she decided to consult the local witch called Nsota. And fortunately or unfortunately for Jago, Nsota had been waiting for her, and she encourages her to come and find out more about her mother, while Nsota has her own agenda. And they have a conversation that prepares Jago for a life of rebellion and against all things patriarchal. And later we see Jago living her life, but also starting to understand what the witch she consulted had told her. So that's basically the main story.
Right, okay, but it's so much more than that. And Rachel, why have we invited you here?
I think you've invited me here because you like me. Also, because I spent several years living in Uganda. And when I read The First Woman recently, I mentioned to my mum, who is one of the volunteers at your bookshop, that I just was transported immediately back to the familiar surroundings of Uganda. One part of the story takes place just briefly in the town of Jinja, where I lived. And I'm fairly sure you were describing, in fact, one of the streets in the neighborhood, possibly even the street where I lived and worked for a while. So it was wonderful to read such a great story, which also I could just picture so clearly where these things were taking place, and be reminded of the wonderful Ugandan culture and people from my time there. So.
Well, I noticed that, so you weren't there at the time that it is about. You were there more recently. And Jennifer, you live in, is it Birmingham?
Manchester. I live in Manchester.
Manchester. So,
that's why it's grey all around.
There's an interesting series of books at the moment about vampires in Manchester, but yes, there is. But anyway, that's another subject altogether. Now, so how did you do your research? How much did you actually have to? How much were you able to rely on your imagination, or how did you have to go back, or how did you prepare this? Because there's so much that really just rings so true about it, even for someone who isn't there like me.
First of all, I started writing this book when I was in Uganda.
I think that shows.
Yeah, and I just wanted to talk about childhood in Uganda at the time. And when I came to Britain, I came to do a master's degree. And this is the book that I worked on while I was doing my MA in Manchester, but when I've completed it, it was rejected left, right, and center for so long. I think I gave it, that was around 2003 when I was rejected, but I tried until 2008. And when I couldn't get it published, I put it away, and then I wrote Chintu, which later got published in 2013 in Africa, but got published here in 2018, you know. And so much of what I wrote, first of all, was very fresh in my mind between the time I left Uganda and the time I completed it. But there's a part of it that I had to go back and do research. That's the place called Bugelere, and the history of the village where Chirabo lives. It's my mother's world, and I didn't know it very well because, you know, as you know, Rachel, we are such a patriarchal society that I belong to my father and his family, so I know much about them, but rarely know much about your mother, where she comes from, or her family. So I went back and had a good sit down with my mother and did a lot of research going back to the 1800s, because she had also grown up with her grandmother, rather her grandfather, and he had passed on a lot of history of Bugelere. And thankfully, my mother doesn't read English, so I quite took her descendants and perverted them. So most of Chirabo's descendants, I kind of used Chirabo and Nsuta and her grandmother. I kind of used my mother's ancestors.
Right, wow. Do they know this?
No, they have no idea. I haven't told them at all. But it was fantastic, because I could imagine the places where they lived and just imagine who they were, what they were, and just make them not so good people.
That's interesting, because I wrestle a lot with, I think that would be a brilliant story. That would make a fantastic novel, but unfortunately it's my life. And just in respect of fiction, I couldn't do that, but also out of respect of the people around me, I just couldn't do that. Has it been published there?
Oh no, it's published in Britain, and Britain so my British publisher has the Commonwealth rights. So as soon as the book comes out, they take it to Uganda. But my mom has a copy, but she won't read it. She doesn't read English. She just shows it to people. Say, "Oh, Jennifer wrote another book. Oh, fantastic!" But the rest of my siblings are not very familiar with this history. So,
Rachel, you were going to ask something.
I was just going to say, like, those women, Nsuta and the grandmother, they did feel so real to me. I could almost see them. I definitely knew some old Jaja women. I was picturing the Jaja who used to cook for us on the base where I live. And
right.
whenever you talked about Nsuta, I could just see. And I never knew her name other than Jaja, which Tracy is the name for a grandparent or an older person. And so she was just Jaja to everybody. I can see why those women felt so real when you say that they were based on real people.
The real people. Yes. Nsuta and grandmother are the everyday woman in Uganda of that age. You know, you can take their faces and plaster them on any woman who is in their 50s and they're wearing a busoti, and they will be just because there's that archetype for Ugandan woman of a certain age and the way they dress and the way they speak. So that was pretty easy for me to do. It's until you go back to the 1800s that I struggled and had to use a little bit of imagination and rely more on my mother's description of her descendants.
So one thing that strikes me, and you do have a section of the book that's called something like Why Caged Hens Peck Each Other, is, yes, I fully understand and appreciate that it's a very patriarchal society.
Yeah.
But it's almost, it reminds me of Margaret Atwood in how the men may have power, but it's the women who are really causing trouble for each other.
Indeed. And for me, it was interesting to observe women at that level and how we operate under oppression, how we relate to each other under oppression, because often, and it's not just women, all oppressed people, because the oppressor is so way above and far away from you, you can't reach them. But when you stretch your arms out, you can reach fellow oppressed people. And whenever you're oppressed, there's a pressure exerted on you, and that pressure must be, expended. You must get rid of it. And since the oppressor is out of reach, you turn on to each other. But often when I was growing up, I would hear things like, oh, women can't stand each other. Why are women so terrible to each other? Or people would say, fellow women would say, I'd rather have a male boss than a female boss. And I kept on wondering what is going on here. It's until you start to observe and realize, hell no, women don't hate women. It's just that where else do they put their pain?
That's really interesting and absolutely rings true. And even in terms of in the first chapters, and there's so much that I don't want to tell because I don't want to spoil things, but in the first chapters, the children they were playing with their dolls, and that made me laugh. What they're trying to do to show that they are womanly is they're trying to nurse their babies, they're trying to breastfeed their babies, and you'd never get a British child playing like that, but this is the value. And when they're excited, they lift their breasts to the sky, and it's all in these terms so foreign to me. But then when she thinks that she's not behaving, she casts herself in terms of the witch, the female baddie.
Yes.
And so it is all this imposed language that they're already accepting.
Absolutely. And women, when they are, because when you meet the witch, you realize that actually this is an exceedingly intelligent woman, and she's rebellious. And because the patriarchy did not have space for those women, it could not tolerate them. When it failed to contain them, they were cast in the spaces of a witch, to discourage other women from behaving the way such women behaved. So it was a way of control, of controlling women's imagination, women's fight for their rights and freedom. So once Nsuta herself is cast as a witch, then she's free and she can do all sorts of things because, she's a witch, and she takes it on board. Because when Chirabo says, you're the only witch I know, she's like, yeah, I am.
She kind of embraces it. The other thing that I found really interesting in terms of the way women relate to each other is that, and that kind of reminded me of my time in Uganda as well, was when the women, I think it's with Chirabo and her friend, Guiba, who becomes pregnant by Sio. Sorry, oh gosh, giving away spoilers, sorry. But she talks about how you're not a woman anymore, you're a man. You're educated, you will be the person who employs me and my children to clean your house, to wash your clothes. And when I read that, I remembered how when I was in Uganda, the women would often greet me in the way they would greet a man, by kneeling to shake my hand. And I would always say, no, get up, I'm a woman with you. And I just would always assume that it was because I was a Muzungu, a white person. And I was there as a nurse, so I had sort of a professional status. But when I read that, I thought actually I was was professional, I was educated, I was single, I didn't have children following me around. And so maybe that reaction of Ugandan women, particularly in the villages, was not about my ethnicity, but actually because they were putting me in their heads in that category of being a man. And I had to kind of go back and almost reframe those situations. So what makes the difference for you as to whether a woman is seen as the witch or the man? What kind of sends those two sends people off in those two different directions? Because Nsuta isn't seen as a man, despite being intelligent and professional as a nurse. She's the witch, whereas Chirabo is going to be seen as a man.
Yeah, absolutely. A woman being placed in the spaces of being witch, it's mainly the patriarchy that does that. It's more of men who do that, and women who are jealous, that is done mainly by the failure to control you. But women being perceived as men is mainly by fellow women who are often marginalized, the lowest working class people who are going to come into your house, who are people you feed, you give directions to or orders to, the people you pay. They're going to see you in that way. Now, of course, being white places you outside the Ugandan realm.
Sure. I realize you can't completely separate these things. There's that intersectionality.
Definitely, you can't. And Ugandans are not as, I think you must have realized, they're not as decolonized as Black people in Britain. Coloniality is still very close to them because of most of the other culture that we live is British. Okay, so the education, the language of power is English. Also, it's the language of instruction, it's the language of government. It's all people who have been educated are in power. So because you come from that world, that brought that culture, you are going to be put outside. People are going to relate to you differently. You are always, until you start to speak the language, you're always treated in a particular way. Yeah. So whether that is masculinized for a woman, that is also possible. So you were not very wrong in that respect. But when it comes to Ugandan women, those who are placed in the witchdom are mainly done so by the patriarchy, and those who are placed in the masculinities are done so by working class marginalized women.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. And I definitely noticed when I started to speak some Luganda that people's attitudes to me would change.
Okay, it absolutely changes. They will give you a name, they'll give you a clan, and just remove you from, But if you speak, I go home, and if I speak English, sometimes when I return, my mom says to my siblings, "Oh, the British is back. Make sure you keep time."
Oh. Sure. And
so, absolutely. So if I behave, and sometimes I do, if I want to get away with certain things, I only speak English, and I speak it with a particular accent rather than the way we speak English in Uganda. And then I can say certain things. I can be firm, just occupying that position of the colonizer.
It's fascinating that there are all these markers, because we think it's as simple as color, nationality, and gender, but it's none of that is simple at all.
Mhm.
Wow. Well, I loved Nisuda. I thought she was a fabulous character, and I thought the last scene, the opening of the book, I had gone away. I was out of town by myself, very unusually, and I had a couple of hours to read, which never happens for me. I usually read a book 4 pages at a time, and I was able to just sit and read it, and I was completely lost in it. And I think all anybody has to do is read that first story, and they're just going to be caught up in it. But the end was just beautiful, and well, it's dancing in the rain, isn't it? That's not spoiling anything. And I just, anybody who asks me how the book is, I just say, just wait for the end. It's just so beautiful. So really, really full of admiration for your book, and really can't wait for your next one.
Thank you very much.
I just, it's genuinely, I do wonder though, for anyone who's read The First Woman and enjoyed it, do you have any recommendations for books that they might also enjoy?
Yes, I have a few books that I read that I thought other people might enjoy. The first one is The Dust Never Settles. This one is by Karina Lickorish Quinn. Now, this came out last year and I read it and I couldn't believe it. Now, the major thing I liked about this book was that Karina speaks to you in their, it's set in Lima. So you are talking to a native and they're talking to you not in perfect English, but in the English they use back home. And therefore you feel like you've been letting, you know, they are letting you see all and everything, because often, as you might know, there's a way we people who speak English as a second language write to include the whole world, and therefore we write perfect English. And then there are times when we are like in my books, I'm like, no, I'm going to talk to you the way we speak English in Uganda. And that allows me to let you see normally what we would cover up, things we wouldn't show the world. But this book took me there, and it's about the restless history that for a long time has been hidden and buried, and that the history is shaking up and wants to have its day, its light in the day, and it all comes out in interesting ways. So I was pretty excited about this one. I recommend it. And then An American Marriage.
Yeah.
This came out a long time ago, but oh my God, I've never seen a perfectly written book like this one. It's one of those that are very hard to put down.
And I didn't read that. I read Silver Sparrow, but I'm told that I should have just gone back to An American Marriage.
You absolutely. Then another book that knocked me out last year was A Net for Small Fish.
I loved that.
Ooh, and I've met the author.
Have you? You're showing off. Well, I'm going to show off that I've met you.
Luciago. I didn't know about this history, you know, in Britain, but oh my God.
It needed so much more attention than it got.
Oh my, it's absolutely fantastic. As an author, of course, you're reading and saying, how is she doing this? How could she do? How did she get over with this? And she just brought that London from, was it the 13th century? And you smell it, you taste it. It's just fantastic.
It's sort of Thelma and Louise in the court of, can't remember whose court it was, 17th century court. So, yeah.
Well, absolutely. And then finally, Remembered
Right.
by Yvonne Butterfelson. Now, this is set in the US, but it's about a woman whose sister died, but every time something horrible is going to happen, her sister returns. So the book opens when the sister is back and the living sister just ignores her goes to the wardrobe and picks up a dress for bad news. It is fantastic. I
Wow.
recommend it. So now I thought, you know what, don't ask for a stack. You know, because I read, it said, oh, can you have a stack of books? I thought, do they realize what they're saying? So I'm going to stop there.
You don't have to. And you haven't shown us a picture of your book. I've lent mine out, my copy of The First Woman.
Thank God I have it. Here's The First Woman. This is the hardcover.
It's beautiful.
It is, and these are Ugandan colors. My publisher is fantastic with covers. So when it came out, and in Uganda, most people ask for the hardcover, even though there's a soft cover which is way cheaper and very, very beautiful. Ugandans go for this because it's so Ugandan. I'm sure Rachel noticed that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Are you writing again, Jennifer?
Yes. I'm working on a novel right now. This one is set in a little village called Matuga. It's off Bombo Road. I'm sure Rachel, you haven't been there because this is more in near Kampala than in Jinja. And it's a book that started out as a script. Because I was here thinking, children born in Britain, especially Ugandan children, don't have access to oral traditional stories. So let me put a few stories down, but I didn't want to write a book. So I thought, let me write a script and it will be animated. But I just quickly found out that, you know what, you just can't turn around and write a script and imagine it's going to be done. So in 2019, I went to Uganda and I took the short story collection and gave it to one of my sisters. And my niece turned around and said, but auntie, you're writing books for grown-ups, but my mother doesn't even read books. I am the one who read books, but you don't even write for us. And I turned to her and I said, look, I'm sorry, but I don't know how to write for children. I know how to write for grown-ups, but not for children. And in Uganda, of course, children don't talk back and say, that's the most dumb thing you've ever done, you'd ever say, but they tell you with their eyes. So she just turned and looked at me like, wow, I thought you're clever. You know, and she's one of those kids who can't hide what they're thinking. And so I came back and thought, okay, let me turn this script into a book. And that was during the lockdown. I had nothing else to do. So I worked on it a little feverishly, and it started to develop into something else. And I started out with age 9, then it went to age 11. I don't know what age it is now, but I've been told it's a crossover. It can be read both by young readers and grown-ups. I hope that's the case. But recently I went back to Uganda just to see the place where I set it. And it had changed a great deal. And I hadn't realized that I was writing because for some reason I'm writing for children. I used my mind the way I saw the world when I was a child. Yeah. So the whole place was virginal and it was beautiful. I went back and they had built all around it. The swamps are gone. And I thought, oh my God, the hill has been quarried. So I'm rewriting it again, of course, with a lot of anger.
Oh no. And do you wish you hadn't gone back?
Well, because I tend to write the physical Uganda, and this is very important to me because when I was in Uganda, I used to read novels from the West, and before I even came out here, I knew about London Bridge, Buckingham Palace, and all those major spaces in Britain. Go to New York, I knew New York Times, all those New York Times Square, those places through books. So I thought, okay, if I'm going to write Uganda, I'm going to write real places. And so when readers go to Uganda, they tend to look for those places.
Yeah, of course, I understand.
So this is set on a hill. in a place called Matuga, and there's a hill, and it has rocks, and those rocks exist because I used to see them when I was young. So I needed to go back and make sure that if a reader turns up to Matuga and looks for the hill, it's the real deal. So it's important that now I'm going to change it a little bit, especially the quarried part. But in a way, I'm glad I did, because now the book has taken a very dark tone, because of the anger.
Right. Okay. Well, I look forward to seeing this. I think. It was really interesting listening to this creative process and how your genuine experiences.
It is. It's interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. So, do you have a title or a date?
I'm playing around with two titles. One is The Secret History of Canine Crimes.
Oh, wow.
No.
That's catchy.
The other that I can't make up my mind about is The Cats Would Watch the World Burn. They would watch the world burn.
Right.
If it would take the dogs with it, but I haven't.
I'm sure your publisher has some experts who will advise you.
Oh yeah,
well
they will. But I haven't shown it to. I was supposed to send it in December, but then when I went to Uganda and things changed, so I haven't sent it to my agent, and my publisher hasn't looked at it.
Well, they've got something to look forward to then. Well, Jennifer, it's been fascinating talking to you. We really look forward to what you come out with next. And thank you ever so much for joining us at Books at Lunchtime.
Thank you for inviting me and for hosting me. Rachel, thank you for spending some time with me, and everybody who is part of your bookshop. You are the people who keep our books in public. So I thank you very, very much for all the work you do.
Thank you. We work together really well. Thank you again.